Hi students,
Welcome to lesson number 32.
Social Stratification, Gender and Inequality. Now the brief introduction. Throughout most of recorded history and around the globe, women have taken a backseat to men. It can be argued that there is rarely any society where men do not enjoy more power, wealth, status and influence than women. This is the base for gender inequalities throughout the society. It is evident from the fact that men are given an excessive share of social, political, economic and cultural resources. This proves that gender itself is one of the significant bases of stratification. Yet, research studies on stratification, as discussed earlier, were gender blind. They were written as if women did not have an existence, or as though for research on power, wealth and prestige, women did not make an interesting or important category. Thus, the studies of gender and stratification are comparatively recent. The learning objectives: the students will be able to discuss gender and stratification, how gender socialization and class contribute to gender inequality, and they can also discuss the theoretical perspective on gender. Now, we will understand what is stratification, gender and inequality. Stratification is a particular form of social inequality. It refers to the presence of social groups which are ranked one above the other in terms of power, prestige and wealth their member possesses. Those who belong to a particular group or stratum will have some awareness of common interest and common identity. They will share a similar lifestyle which will distinguish them from the members of other social strata. The beliefs that social inequalities are caused by natural or biological inequalities seems to sense as rationalization to justify the stratification system. The beliefs serve to make social inequality appear rational and reasonable. Currently, the existence of inequality, its causes and consequences as related to social class, genders, ethnicity and even region or locality continues to assume sociological prominence. Now, we will have a look on gender and inequality. Like many questions of interest to sociologists, the nature of maleness and femaleness is not so easily classified. In general, sociologists use the term sex to refer to the anatomical and physiological differences that define male and female bodies. Gender, by contrast, concerns the psychological, social and cultural differences between males and females. Gender is linked to socially constructed notions of masculinity and femininity. It is not necessarily direct product of an individual biological sex. The distinction between sex and gender is fundamental one, since many differences between male and females are not biological in origin. Contrasting approaches have been taken to explain the formation of gender identities and the social role based on those identities. Broadly speaking, the term gender refers to cultural ideas that construct images and expectation of both females and males. Nature has divided human race between men and women, but their status and role in society are determined by outculture. When we speak of women as fair sex or weaker sex, or when invoke the etiquette of ladies first, our attention is not confined to the biological fact, have already entered the realm of culture. In social sciences and literary criticism, the term gender is used to indicate the differences in social status of man and women, particularly to refer to the fact that women are placed in a lower status in relation to their intrinsic worth. Feminist thus focuses on gender perspective that calls for cultural transformation of society. It implies the right ordering of status of women in relations to men in social and political life. Culture usually refers to certain distinctive features of different groups. However, some typical attitudes towards gender can be found throughout the civilized world. These attitudes tend to divide men and female personality traits and behavioral tendencies in two opposite patterns. These patterns may be described as masculinity and femininity, respectively. Masculinity, for example, typically includes aggressiveness, logical outlook, control of emotional expression and attitude of dominance, while femininity is associated with peacefulness, intuitiveness, emotional expressiveness and submissiveness. Some variations in these characteristics are possible in different social contexts. For example, a wife may be relatively submissive to her husband, but as a mother, she may not be so towards her children. Moreover, the degree of submissiveness of a woman may vary from one case to another. In any case, relative dominance of man and relative submissiveness of women represent almost universal cultural traits which are not directly based on biological differences. Broadly speaking, these are the products of the social organization based on patriarchy and its institutions, the division of labor in the family and the competitive and exploitative character of capitalism. From this perspective, the concepts of masculinity and femininity serve as an instrument of social control that reinforce male dominance. So, if a woman tends to behave in an authoritarian manner, particularly towards men, her behavior is termed to be indecent. In short, the expectations attached to differential roles of men and women serve as the foundation of gender inequality in society. According to 𝗳𝗏 in his essay, A Discourse on the Origin of Inequality had distinguished between natural inequality and conventional inequality. National inequality describes the inequality of age, health, beauty, physical and intellectual capacities of different people which were created by nature. These inequalities are largely unalterable. On the other hand, conventional inequalities represents disparities of wealth, prestige and power among different individuals. These inequalities are the product of our social arrangements. We can undertake a critical examination of these inequalities from the point of view of justice and can reduce them by altering our social arrangements. In other words, conventional inequalities are alterable. While the division of society into two sexes, male and female, represent natural inequality, and gender inequalities are the product of convention and culture. These inequalities can be questioned and removed wherever they are found objectionable. Another way to understand the origins of gender inequalities is to study about the process of gender socialization. Now, we will understand how gender socialization leads to gender inequality. Another route to take the understanding the origins of gender differences or gender inequality is the study of gender socialization. The learning of gender roles with the help of social agencies such as the family and the media. Such an approach makes a distinction between biological sex and social sex. Through contact with various agencies of socialization, both primary and secondary, children gradually internalize the social norms and expectations which are seen to correspond with their sex. Gender differences are not biologically determined, they are culturally produced. According to this view, gender inequalities result because men and women are socialized into different roles. These positive and negative reinforcements to boys and girls in learning and conforming to expected sex roles leads to gender differentiation. If an individual develops gender practices which they do not correspond to his or her biological sex, that is, they are deviant. The explanation is seen to resist inadequate or irregular socialization. According to this functionist view, socialization agencies contribute to the maintenance of social order by overseeing the smooth gender socialization of new generation. This rigid interpretation of sex roles and socialization has been criticized on a number of fronts. Many writers argue that gender socialization is not an inherently smooth process. Different agencies such as family, schools and peer groups may be at odds with one another. Moreover, socialization theories ignore the social expectations surrounding sex roles. As Connell has argued, agencies of socialization cannot produce mechanical effects in a growing person. What they do is invite the child to participate in social practice on given terms. Social influences on gender identity flow through many diverse channels. Even parents committed to raising their children in a non-sexist way find existing patterns of gender learning difficult to combat. Studies of parents-child interaction, for example, have shown distinct differences in the treatment of boys and girls even when the parents believe their reactions to both are the same, like the toys, the picture books and television programs experienced by young children all tend to emphasize difference between male and female attributes. Male characters generally outnumber females in most children books, television programs and films. Male characters tend to play more active, adventurous roles, while females are portrayed as passive, expectant and domestically oriented. Clearly, gender socialization is very powerful. Once a gender is assigned, society expects individuals to act like females or males. It is in the practices of everyday life that these expectations are fulfilled and reproduced. According to Cornell, gender relations are the product of everyday interactions and practices. The actions and behavior of average people in their personal lives are directly linked to collective social arrangements in society. These arrangements are continuously reproduced over lifetimes and generations. Gender, combined with other elements of social stratification such as caste, class, ethnicity, location, etc., forms the basis of social and gender inequalities. Scholars argue that one of the problems posed by the gender and stratification studies is understanding gender inequalities in terms of class divisions. They further argue that the problem seems to be simple but is difficult to sort out. This is because gender inequalities have their roots in history than just class system. For example, in hunting-gathering societies too, men are considered superior to women, and these societies are classless. But class division are so visible in modern societies that they tend to overlap significantly with gender inequalities. Thus, it is important to understand and explain gender inequalities in class terms. The conventional positions in the class analysis was that the paid works of women is relatively insignificant compared to that of men. Goldthorpe emphasizes that the argument is not in favor of the ideology of sexism. Rather, it recognizes the subordinate position of most women in the labor force. Therefore, the majority of women are dependent economically on their husbands. Thus, women's class position is determined by the husband's class situation. However, this argument of Goldthorpe was criticized on many levels. Yet, Goldthorpe and others continue to defend the argument while adding new observations. For research purposes, household classification is now determined by the dominant breadwinner, irrespective of the gender. In almost all societies, gender is a significant form of social stratification. Gender is a critical factor in structuring the types of opportunities and life chances faced by individuals and groups, and strongly influences the roles they play within social institutions from the household to the state. Although the roles of men and women vary from culture to culture, there is no instance of a society in which females are more powerful than males. Men's roles are generally more highly valued and rewarded than women's roles. In almost every culture, women bear the primary responsibility for childcare and domestic work, while men have traditionally become responsible for providing the family livelihood. The prevailing division of labor between the sexes has led men and women assuming unequal positions in terms of power, prestige and wealth. Despite the advances that women have made in countries around the world, gender differences continue to serve as a basis for social inequalities. Investigating and accounting for gender inequality has become a central concern of sociologists. Many theoretical perspectives have been advanced to explain men's enduring dominance over women in the realm of economic politics, the family, and elsewhere. Now, we will discuss on the functionalist approach. The functionalist approach sees society as a system of interlinked parts which operate smoothly to produce social solidarity. The functionalist and functionalist inspired perspective on gender seek to show that gender differences contribute to social stability and integration. While such views once commanded great support, they have been heavily criticized for neglecting social tensions at the expense of consensus and for promulgating a conservative view of the social world. Writers who subscribe to the natural differences school of thought tend to argue that the division of labor between men and women is biologically based. Women and men perform those tasks for which they are biologically best suited. Thus, the social anthropologist George Murdoch saw it as both practical and convenient that women should be at home. Talcott Parsons, a leading functionalist thinker, concerned himself with the role of the family in industrial society. He was particularly interested in the socialization of children and believed that stable, supportive families are the key to successful socialization. In Parsons' view, the family operates most efficiently with a clear-cut sexual division of labor in which female acts in expressive roles, providing care and security to children and offering them emotional support. Men, on the other hand, should perform instrumental roles, namely being the breadwinner in the family. Because of the stressful nature of men's role, women's expressive and nurturing tendencies should also be used to stabilize and comfort men. This complementary division of labor, springing from a biological distinction between the sexes, would ensure the solidarity of the family. Another functionalist perspective on child rearing was advanced by John Bowlby, who argued that mother is crucial to the primary socialization of children. If the mother is absent or if a child is separated from the mother at a young age, a state referred to as maternal deprivation, where the child runs a high risk of being inadequately socialized. This leads to serious social and psychological difficulties later in life, including antisocial and psychopathic tendencies. Bowlby argued that a child's well-being and mental health can be best guaranteed through a close, personal and continuous relationship with his mother. Now we will understand the views of socialist and Marxist feminists on gender. Engels argued that under capitalism, material and economic factors underlay women's subservience to men because patriarchy has its root in private property. Engels argued that capitalism intensifies patriarchy, men's domination over women, by concentrating wealth and power in the hands of a small number of men. First, capitalism intensifies patriarchy more than earlier social systems because it creates enormous wealth compared to previous eras, which confers power on men as wage earners as well as possessors and inheritors of property. Second, for the capitalist economy to succeed, it must define people, in particular women, as consumers, persuading them that their needs only be met through ever increasing consumption of goods and products. Last, capitalism relies on women to labor for free in the home, caring and cleaning. To Engels, capitalism exploited men by paying low wages and women by paying no wages. Now, we will discuss the socialist feminism. They have argued that the reformist goals of liberal feminism are inadequate. They have called for the restructuring of the family, the end of domestic slavery, and the introduction of some collective means of carrying out child rearing, child caring, and household maintenance. Following Marx, many argued that these ends would be achieved through a socialist revolution, which would produce true equality under a state-centered economy designed to meet the needs of all. Now, we will understand the views of radical feminism. At the heart of radical feminism is a belief that men are responsible for and benefit from the exploitation of women. The analysis of patriarchy, that is the systematic domination of females by males, is of central concern to this branch of feminism. Patriarchy is viewed as a universal phenomena that has existed across time and culture. Radical feminists often concentrate on the family as one of the primary sources of women's oppression in society. They argue that men exploit women by relying on the free domestic labor that women provide in the home. As a group, men also deny women access to positions of power and influence in society. As said by S. Firestone, an early radical feminist writer, argued that men control women's roles in reproduction and child rearing. Because women are biologically able to give birth, they become dependent materially on men for protection and livelihood of child. This biological inequality is socially organized in the nuclear family. Firestone speaks of a sex class to describe women's social position and argues that women can be emancipated only through the abolition of the family and the power relations which characterize it. Other radical feminists point to male violence against women as central to male supremacy. According to such a view, domestic violence, rape and sexual harassment are all part of the systematic oppression of women rather than isolated cases with their own psychological or criminal roots. Even interactions in daily life such as non-verbal communications, pattern of listening and interrupting, and women's sense of comfort in public continue to gender inequality. Moreover, popular conceptions of beauty and sexuality are imposed by men on women in order to produce a certain type of femininity. For example, social and cultural norms that emphasize a slim body and a caring, nurturing attitude towards men help to perpetuate women's subordination. The objectification of women through the media, fashion and advertising turns women into sexual objects whose main role is to please and entertain men. Radical feminists do not believe that women can be liberated sexual oppression through reforms or gradual change, because patriarchy is a systematic phenomena. They argue gender equality can only be attained by overthrowing the patriarchal order. The use of patriarchy as a concept for explaining gender inequality has been popular with many feminist theorists. In asserting that the personal is political, radical feminists have drawn widespread attention to the many linked dimensions of women's oppression. Their emphasis of women has brought these issues into the heart of mainstream debates about women's subordination. Many black feminists argue that ethnic divisions among women are not considered by the main feminist school of thought and are oriented to the dilemmas of white, predominantly middle class women living in industrialized societies. Moreover, the very idea that there is a unified form of gender oppression that is experienced equally by all women is problematic. Dissatisfaction with existing forms of feminism has led to the emergence of a strand of thought which concentrates on the particular problems facing black women. The writings of American black feminists emphasize the influence of the powerful legacy of slavery, segregation and the civil rights movement on gender inequalities in the black community. They point out that early black sufferers supported the campaign for women's rights, but realized that the question of race could not be ignored. Black women were discriminated against on the basis of their race and gender. Explanatory frameworks favored by white feminists, for example, the view of the family as a mainstay of patriarchy, may not be applicable in black communities, where the family represents a main point of solidarity against racism. In other words, the oppression of black women may be found in different locations compared with that of white women. Black feminists contend therefore that any theory of gender equality which does not take racism into account cannot be expected to explain black women's oppression adequately. Class dimensions are another factor which cannot be neglected in the case of many black women. Some black feminists held is its focus on the interplay between race, class and gender concerns. Black women are disadvantaged. They argue on the basis of their color, their sex and their class position. When these three factors interact, they reinforce and re-intensify on another. Now, we will understand the views of postmodern feminism. Like black feminism, postmodern feminism challenges the idea that there is a unitary basis of identity and experience shared by all women. This strand of feminism draws on the cultural phenomena of postmodernism in the arts, architecture, philosophy and economics. Some of the roots of postmodern feminism are found in the work of continental theorists like Derrida. Postmodern feminists reject the claims that there is a grand theory that can explain the position of women in society or that there is any single universal essence or category of women consequently. These feminists reject the accounts given by others to explain gender inequality such as patriarchy, race or class as essentialist. Rather than there existing an essential code to womanhood, there are many individuals and groups all over whom very different experiences such as the heterosexuals, lesbians, black women, working class women, etc. The otherness of different groups and individual is celebrated in all its diverse forms. Emphasis on the positive side of otherness is a major theme in postmodern feminism and symbolizes plurality, diversity, difference and openness. There are many truths, roles and construction of reality. Hence, the recognition of difference on the basis of sexuality, age and race, for example, is central to postmodern feminism. As well as the recognition of difference between groups and individuals, postmodern feminists have stressed the importance of deconstruction. In particular, they have sought to deconstruct male language and masculine view of the world. In its place, postmodern feminists have attempted to create fluid, open terms and language which more closely reflect women's experiences. For many postmodern feminists, men see the world in terms of pairs or binary distinctions, that is good versus bad, right versus wrong, beautiful versus ugly, for example. Men, they argue, have cast the male as normal and female as a deviation from it. Deconstruction involves attacking binary concepts and recasting their opposites in a new and positive manner. From the above discussion, it is clear that a gender informs and organizes social stratification, and gender socialization plays an important role in creating gender inequalities. It has been argued by Goldthorpe that women's paid work was comparatively insignificant to that of men. Different schools of feminism explain gender inequalities through a wide range of factors and social processes such as sexism, patriarchy, capitalism. The question of gender stratification is not to be understood in terms of inequality between men and women and in terms of subordination and women alone. Recent research on masculinity also suggests maleness to be the symbolic construct as a fair maleness, is reflecting that how gender as a cultural construct expresses the relational dimensions rather than the individual attributes across societies and cultures.